The Galactic Archive was a swirling mess of color and chaos, like a party thrown by a committee of drunk peacocks. All manner of alien races mingled in this vast, surreal library of the cosmos, where every species worth its salt came to document its existence, like cosmic narcissists with nothing better to do. At the center of this bureaucratic madness stood the Council of Order, or as some preferred to call them, the Committee of Utterly Humorless Beings. "We hereby propose a ban on sarcasm," announced an alien whose face looked like it was permanently stuck in a state of constipation. His name, Glarthox, sounded like a throat infection. The room went silent, which was an achievement considering it usually buzzed like a broken neon sign. Among the throng of creatures, Zephyr Rin, a human archivist, stood with her arms crossed, a wry smile playing on her lips. She was the kind of woman who could find humor in a funeral, and the idea of banning sarcasm was like telling a fish to stop swimming. "Sarcasm is a fundamental part of cultural expression," Glarthox droned on, oblivious to the irony. "It breeds dissent, confusion, and undermines our efforts for a harmonious existence." "Oh, sure," Zephyr muttered under her breath, "because that's what's been stopping the galaxy from singing Kumbaya." She earned a few snickers from the alien peanut gallery, including a creature that resembled a sentient jellyfish, its tentacles shaking like it was trying to suppress a chuckle. "Miss Rin," Glarthox snapped, "do you have something to contribute, or are you merely here to scoff at our proceedings?" Zephyr shrugged, feigning innocence. "Contribute? Hell, sarcasm's my native tongue, but if you're looking to outlaw it, you might as well slap a muzzle on humanity. We'll suffocate faster than a fish out of water." A solemn-looking creature with 6 eyes and a penchant for wearing monocles on all of them interjected. "Sarcasm erodes respect, Miss Rin. It belittles." "So does your outfit, but you don't see me calling for a ban," Zephyr retorted, drawing a ripple of laughter from those who still remembered how to smile. The council chamber, a monolithic space where the echoes of past debates loomed like ghosts with grudges, was filled with a tension so thick you could cut it with a laser scalpel. As the council members deliberated on the fate of sarcasm, Zephyr leaned against a pillar, her mind wandering to the possible outcomes of this insanity. The archive itself was a labyrinthine hellscape of data, knowledge, and more bureaucracy than any sane being could stomach. With every scroll, hologram, and digital tome, there lay a story waiting to bore someone to death. Zephyr had spent years navigating this maze, all the while keeping her sanity intact with the help of a well-placed quip and a generous dose of irreverence. Her fellow archivists, a motley crew of outcasts and oddballs, were just as baffled by the council's latest nonsense. Take Gruck, for instance, a hulking mass of muscle and scales who looked like he could crush a boulder with his bare hands, but whose heart was softer than an overripe fruit. "What do they think we'll do without sarcasm? Probably implode," Zephyr said, eyeing Gruck's attempt at organizing a pile of holographic data slips. "Or maybe we'll all just spontaneously combust from pent-up wit." Gruck grinned, his teeth a dazzling array of sharpness. "Think they'll ban jokes next?" "They might as well," Zephyr replied. "Though if they ban humor, it'll just mean more work for the archive. We'll have to catalog the last known jokes in the galaxy." As the day dragged on, the council's lack of humor spread through the archive like a virus. Zephyr found herself dodging endless corridors of dusty tomes and holographic records, each more tedious than the last. The idea of living in a galaxy without sarcasm was almost as unbearable as being trapped in an elevator with Glarthox. Her comm device buzzed, startling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Flurg, her favorite Glurgan, a creature with more eyes than common sense who worked in data retrieval. "Meeting. Now." "Fantastic," Zephyr muttered, rolling her eyes. More lectures on how to be less human. The meeting room was as dreary as she expected, with its walls lined with screens displaying an endless loop of council edicts and motivational slogans that would make a monk weep. Flurg's head bobbed in greeting as she entered. Zephyra, heard about the sarcasm thing. Heard about it, laughed about it, already writing a eulogy for my career, she said, taking a seat. Flurg's eyes blinked in unison. Why would they ban sarcasm? It's the glue of interspecies relations. Apparently, some species can't handle a little ribbing, Zephyr said. Too many delicate egos in power these days. As they discussed the ramifications of this latest bureaucratic abomination, the atmosphere turned conspiratorial. It was clear to everyone present that the Council's decision was more than just a ban. It was an attack on freedom of expression, an attempt to homogenize the galaxy into a bland, humorless abyss. So, what do we do? Flurg asked, his tentacles drumming on the table in agitation. Fight back, Zephyr declared, her voice brimming with defiance. We keep being ourselves. We keep laughing, keep joking, keep being sarcastic. They can't muzzle an entire species. The group nodded in agreement, a spark of rebellion igniting in the room. Zephyr felt a surge of adrenaline. This was what being human was all about. Standing up to the absurd, fighting back with humor and wit. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As Zephyr made her way back to her station, she couldn't help but smile. Sure, the Council had the power to impose their will, but they couldn't erase the spirit of a species determined to defy them. And in the grand scheme of the universe, that spirit was more powerful than any edict. As she resumed her work in the archive, Zephyr's mind buzzed with possibilities. She imagined a galaxy where sarcasm was a forbidden art, whispered in shadows and shared in secret. She envisioned underground comedy clubs where beings of all stripes gathered to share forbidden jokes, each punchline a small act of rebellion. In the midst of her musings, she received another message, this time from an unknown contact. The text was simple, yet full of intrigue. Join us. Sarcasm lives. Zephyr's smile widened, her mind racing with the implications. It seemed she wasn't the only one refusing to bow to the Council's nonsense. There were others out there, a resistance of sorts, determined to preserve the humor that gave life its spark. As the lights of the archive flickered in the artificial twilight, Zephyr knew she had a choice to make. Stay in the shadows or step into the light and fight for what made them truly human. The Council might have wanted a galaxy without sarcasm, but Zephyr and her newfound allies were about to show them just how much they needed it. Because in a universe filled with chaos and uncertainty, sometimes all you had was a good laugh and the perfect quip. And that was worth fighting for. The Galactic Archive was a hive of frantic activity. If you defined activity as aliens pacing around like they'd lost their keys, and frantic as the speed at which molasses flows in winter. The Council of Orders' sarcasm ban had spread through the archive like a bad smell, and the place was now as lively as a funeral home at Happy Ior. Zephyr Rin found herself caught in the mire of confusion that the ban had wrought. As a human whose primary mode of communication was sarcasm, she felt like she'd been asked to navigate a minefield blindfolded. Her attempts to hold a basic conversation had become exercises in frustration. Take her latest encounter with Glarthox, the constipation-faced alien who was the unfortunate poster child for humorlessness. Zephyr, he said, as if her name was a particularly distasteful word, how are you finding the transition to a sarcasm-free environment? Just peachy, she replied, her voice dripping with irony. Ah, yes, peaches are quite agreeable, Glarthox replied, his non-existent sense of humor apparently detecting nothing amiss. Zephyr could only stare, wondering if his species evolved solely to test the limits of patience. But Glarthox was hardly the only one grappling with the ban's consequences. The archive was a melting pot of beings, each with their own cultural quirks and idioms. Without sarcasm to grease the wheels of interspecies interaction, misunderstandings abounded. Even the simplest exchanges turned into comedic farces. Take Zephyr's conversation with Corblax, a gelatinous blob from the planet GRGL. Greetings, Zephyr Rin, it gurgled, its voice a bubbling brook of syllables. How does your illustration of humor evolve in this restricted habitation? Swimmingly, she said, not bothering to conceal her sarcasm. Corblax's translation device hummed and blinked, processing her words with all the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives. Ah, you partake in aquatic endeavors for cultural enhancement. It finally confirmed, oozing satisfaction at having decoded her response. Zephyr bit back a sigh, realizing that explaining sarcasm to a gelatinous blob would take more patience than she possessed. As the day dragged on, the archive's corridors echoed with the sounds of aggrieved chit-chat, punctuated by the occasional frustrated sigh. Everywhere Zephyr went, she found someone stifling a sarcastic comment, only to have it emerge as an awkward, sincere remark that left both parties confused. The rebellion, if it could be called that, began to take shape in hushed whispers and knowing nods. Those who cherished their wit and humor exchanged furtive glances that spoke volumes. It was like planning a heist, only instead of gold, they were after the priceless treasure of free expression. In the break room, otherwise known as the Room of Desperation, Zephyr and her fellow archivists gathered, their expressions a mix of amusement and exasperation. Flurg was there, his tentacles fidgeting like a nervous octopus. Gruck, the hulking brute with a heart of gold, loomed over a table that creaked under his weight. Zephyr flopped into a chair, eyeing the sorry excuse for coffee in her cup. "This band's turning us into a bunch of babbling idiots," she said. "Speak for yourself," Gruck rumbled, grinning. "I was a babbling idiot long before the band." "Isn't it delightful?" Flurg added, sarcasm so thick you could spread it on toast. "Now we can miscommunicate with elegance." The group chuckled, the sound more a collective groan than a laugh. The band was absurd, sure, but it had also inadvertently united them in their shared disdain for bureaucratic nonsense. In a galaxy rife with division, it was almost comforting. Zephyr glanced over at Trixel, a diminutive, insect-like creature whose wings buzzed with irritation. "Trixel, how's the cataloging of the interspecies humor files going?" "Well, it's a regular comedy goldmine now," Trixel replied, each word dripping with the poison of sarcasm. "We've managed to categorize what you call a three-eyed alien jokes. We're up to 3 variations." Zephyr chuckled, despite herself. "Maybe we should start a humorless hall of fame, all the jokes that never made anyone laugh." As they joked and griped, the room filled with a reassuring warmth, a shared understanding that despite the chaos, they were in this together. Even in the depths of the archive, amidst the dust-covered records and bureaucratic absurdities, there was a glimmer of hope. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of defiance. As Zephyr left, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of gratitude for her fellow misfits. They were all different, yet bound by their shared need to poke fun at the universe's absurdities. Outside, the corridors were a labyrinth of muted voices and furtive glances. Zephyr had a sense that something was brewing, a subtle shift in the air that hinted at rebellion, and she was determined to be a part of it. Her comm device buzzed again, this time with a message that made her heart race. "Gathering tonight. Coordinates attached." It was an invitation, a call to arms for those willing to fight back against the Council's madness. Zephyr felt a thrill of excitement, the promise of action electrifying her senses. It was time to take a stand, to prove that they wouldn't be silenced. Under the cover of darkness, she made her way to the coordinates, slipping through the archive's corridors with the stealth of a cat burglar. The meeting place was a small, hidden alcove, far from the prying eyes of the Council's enforcers. When she arrived, she found a group already gathered, their faces a mix of determination and mischief. There was Gruck, towering over everyone like a benevolent giant. Flurg, his tentacles bristling with excitement. Trixel, wings buzzing with suppressed energy. And others, 2 beings of all shapes and sizes, united by their refusal to bow to the Council's tyranny. Zephyr felt a surge of pride. These were her people, her allies in the fight for humor and humanity. The gathering was led by a figure Zephyr didn't recognize, a tall, enigmatic alien with a voice like gravel and a presence that commanded attention. "Welcome, friends," the alien said, his tone a blend of warmth and resolve. "We're here because we refuse to be silenced. Humor is our weapon, sarcasm our shield, and together we will defy the Council's edict." Cheers erupted, a cacophony of alien languages and human voices blending into a harmonious symphony of defiance. Zephyr joined in, her heart swelling with the thrill of rebellion. As the meeting progressed, ideas flowed like fine wine, a plan to spread subversive humor, to use wit as a tool to undermine the Council's authority. They would distribute jokes, puns, and sarcastic commentary throughout the archive, a guerrilla campaign to keep the spirit of humor alive. Zephyr found herself caught up in the momentum, her mind racing with possibilities. She envisioned a galaxy where sarcasm was whispered in shadows, a secret rebellion that would spread like wildfire. It was a bold plan, risky and fraught with danger, but it was also exhilarating. The meeting ended with a sense of camaraderie, a shared commitment to the cause. As Zephyr made her way back to her quarters, she felt more alive than she had in years. The band might have tried to silence them, but it had only ignited their resolve. Back in her room, she began drafting her first contribution to the resistance, a series of sarcastic missives that would be distributed throughout the archive. Each one crafted to poke fun at the Council's absurdity, to remind her fellow archivists of the power of humor. In the quiet of the night, as she worked by the light of a flickering hololamp, Zephyr felt a sense of purpose. Humor was their weapon, sarcasm their shield, and she was ready to wield them both with skill and precision. The galaxy might have been a chaotic, confounding place, but it was theirs to shape with wit and laughter. And as long as they had that, they would never be truly powerless. As dawn broke over the archive, Zephyr knew that the fight for humor had only just begun. The Council might have tried to stifle them, but they'd only succeeded in igniting a fire they couldn't hope to extinguish. And for once, the future looked brighter than ever. In the murky underbelly of the Galactic Archive, a place even the janitorial drones avoided, Zephyr and her peculiar band of misfits conspired. The dim light barely touched the edges of the alcove they called their war room, but it was enough to illuminate their determined faces, and occasionally the glistening surface of Corblax's gelatinous body, which was both mesmerizing and mildly unsettling. "All right, team," Zephyr began, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She was leading a rebellion with the strategic prowess of a toddler with a crayon. "We need to take advantage of the aliens' literal-mindedness. If they can't get sarcasm, let's weaponize it." "Weaponized sarcasm," Flurg mused, his tentacles twitching like a caffeinated octopus. "I like it. Sounds like something out of a history book. Or a bad sitcom," Gruck added, the hint of a smile on his brutish face. "But it sounds risky. The Council doesn't take kindly to humor. They might exile us to the Outer Rim." "Which would be great," Trixel buzzed in, his wings vibrating with sarcasm. "Nothing like a vacation on a frozen wasteland." Zephyr smirked. "If we're going to end up exiled, we might as well make it worth it. We need a plan, and I mean a real plan, not the let's hope this works plan we usually rely on." Corblax gurgled, its translation device struggling to articulate its thoughts. "Plan entails coordinated miscommunication." "Exactly," Zephyr said, appreciating the blob's attempt at strategy. "We're going to flood the archive with sarcasm so fast and thick that their processors get overloaded. And while they're trying to figure out if we're sincere or just screwing with them, we make our move. And if that doesn't work, we can always pretend we're performance artists," Gruck suggested. "Or prophets of a new religion. Prophets who preach the gospel of snark," Zephyr chuckled. "I can see it now, and lo, the almighty wit did decree." But amidst the laughter, Zephyr noticed something off. The group had grown quieter, their earlier enthusiasm tempered by a creeping doubt. It seemed the gravity of their rebellion was starting to sink in, threatening to fracture their resolve. "Look, I know this isn't exactly a textbook plan," she admitted, "but when have we ever done anything by the book? Flurg sighed, his tentacles drooping. It's not that, Zephyra, it's just. Some of us are worried about the consequences. The council's not just going to sit back and let us mock them into submission. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Even Trixel's wings stopped their restless buzzing, a clear sign of unease. We're already in deep enough, Gruk said, his voice a low rumble. But I'm with you, Zephyra, we've got to do something. Anything. Agreed, Zephyra nodded. But if this isn't for you, no one's forcing you to stay. Hell, if it weren't for this mess, I might be back home, sipping something slightly stronger than archive coffee. The thought of Earth, with its familiar sarcasm and plentiful caffeine, was almost comforting. But she knew there was no going back. Not yet. Corblax burbled a question, its translation device chirping in confusion. What? Action. Follows. Sarcasm. Zephyra tapped her chin, a hint of mischief in her eyes. We make them question everything they hear. We spread doubt like a virus, and soon they'll be questioning their own edicts. The group exchanged looks, a mix of skepticism and begrudging admiration for the audacity of the plan. But audacity was all they had, along with a shared disdain for authoritarian rules. All right, Flurg said, his determination renewed. Let's do this. Let's make them regret ever underestimating the power of humor. As the rebellion churned into motion, the members of the ragtag crew executed their missions with varying degrees of success and chaos. It was like trying to herd cats with a megaphone, loud, confusing, and likely to end with someone scratched. Gruk had taken to distributing official council notices, each one laced with so much sarcasm it was a wonder the paper didn't drip with it. Phrases like, "Your compliance is voluntary," and by voluntary we mean mandatory, became instant classics among the rebels. Meanwhile, Flurg had hacked into the archive's message boards, seeding them with witty one-liners disguised as serious philosophical debates. It was a game of who could outwit who, and the alien scholars never saw it coming. Trixel had taken a more direct approach, buzzing around the archive's corridors, dropping sarcastic remarks with the precision of a sniper, only to be met with confused stares and the occasional request for a lexicon translation. Zephyra herself had taken on the task of spreading subversive humor through the daily bulletin, disguising it as harmless trivia. Did you know that sarcasm is a leading cause of rebellion in 9 out of 10 civilizations? Had become the unofficial motto of their movement. But not everything was smooth sailing. Internal squabbles began to crop up, like weeds in an already overgrown garden. Some members questioned the plan's effectiveness. Others worried about the consequences, their fear threatening to unravel the fragile camaraderie that bound them. We need to stay united, Zephyra insisted during one of their clandestine meetings, the stress of leadership weighing heavily on her shoulders. If we start fighting each other, the council wins. The council wins regardless, Trixel snapped, its patience as thin as its wings. We can't out-sarcasm an entire bureaucracy. Then what do you suggest? Gruk challenged, his eyes narrowing. We roll over and let them dictate how we talk, how we think. Trixel buzzed angrily, wings a blur of agitation. No, but maybe we need to be smarter about this. More subtle, less in your face. Subtlety's not exactly our strong suit, Flurg pointed out, gesturing to the ragtag group with a tentacle. Right, Zephyra agreed, exasperated but unwilling to let the infighting derail their mission. Our main strength is that they think we're idiots. Let's prove them right while we outsmart them. To her relief, the group seemed to rally behind her, their earlier doubts tempered by the reminder of why they were fighting. Humor was a weapon, but it was also a bond, the glue that held them together in the face of adversity. The rebellion's first major strike was a masterstroke of misdirection and absurdity. At precisely noon, as the archive's workforce broke for a mandatory reflection period, a glorified nap time for overworked aliens, the rebels unleashed their sarcastic payload. Messages flashed across every screen, each one a perfectly crafted piece of sarcastic art. Obey your overlords, or else they might get upset, and remember, Thinking for yourself is only allowed on alternate Thursdays became instant hits, the irony lost on most of the non-human populace. As the messages spread, confusion followed. Reports of malfunctioning translation devices poured in, the aliens' inability to grasp sarcasm resulting in a flood of nonsensical interpretations. It was chaos, glorious and liberating in its absurdity. Even Glarthox found himself caught in the crossfire, his attempts to navigate the chaos as effective as a blindfolded pilot. "Zephyra," he called, confronting her in the hall, "do you know anything about these disruptions?" "Gee, Glarthox, why would you think I'd know anything about it?" she replied, her expression the picture of innocence gone awry. "Because you are human and humans are known for their unpredictability," he replied, a rare hint of exasperation in his otherwise monotone voice. "Unpredictability, us?" Zephyra feigned shock, the grin tugging at her lips betraying her mirth. "Never." But while Glarthox stormed off, befuddled and unsatisfied, Zephyra allowed herself a moment of triumph. The chaos had been a success, a small but significant victory in their war of wit. Yet for all their successes, the cracks in their rebellion began to show. Paranoia crept in like a thief in the night, sowing seeds of suspicion among the ranks. Trust, once their greatest asset, became their Achilles' heel. The Council's response was swift and calculating. Their enforcers prowled the corridors, their presence a constant reminder of the consequences of dissent. It was only a matter of time before their luck ran out. As the rebels regrouped, a palpable tension filled the air, the camaraderie of their earlier meetings replaced by a simmering unease. "We need to be more careful," Zephyra warned, her voice low and urgent. "They're onto us. We can't afford any mistakes." "Easy for you to say," Trixel retorted, its wings a blur of irritation. "You're not the one being followed by a drone every time you make a joke." The truth was, they were all being watched, their every move scrutinized for signs of rebellion. But fear wasn't an option, not if they wanted to succeed. "We've come too far to give up now," Gruck declared, his voice a deep, rumbling assurance. "We've got to keep pushing, keep them guessing." Zephyra nodded, knowing that their survival depended on their unity. "And remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's ever been silenced, who's ever had their voice taken away." The weight of her words settled over the group, a reminder of the stakes and the responsibility that lay on their shoulders. It was daunting, but it was also empowering. As they dispersed, each member intent on their next mission, Zephyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. The rebellion might have been imperfect, fraught with tension and doubt, but it was theirs. A cause worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. And as she watched her allies slip into the shadows, she knew that they were more than a ragtag band of misfits. They were a force, a movement, a flicker of hope in a galaxy that desperately needed it. The rebellion was far from over, but they were ready. Ready to fight, ready to laugh, and ready to defy a council that underestimated the power of humor. In the end, it wasn't just about sarcasm or jokes. It was about freedom, about standing up against tyranny with a smile, and sometimes a well-placed punchline. And as Zephyra turned her thoughts towards the future, she couldn't help but smile. The galaxy was a confounding place, but it was theirs to shape. One sarcastic remark at a time. The Galactic Archive had seen better days, which was saying a lot considering it was older than most civilizations. The latest chaos had left it more disorganized than a teenager's room. But now, it seemed the Council of Order had caught wind of the rebellious undercurrent and responded in typical bureaucratic fashion, by tightening the noose. And just like that, the sarcasm ban wasn't just a proposal. It was law. A ridiculous, humorless law. The kind that made you wonder if the universe was run by sentient spreadsheets. Zephyra Rin found herself crammed into a corner of the archive, barely visible behind a wall of dusty scrolls and outdated holoprojectors. She was hunched over a piece of antique tech like it was the last slice of cake at a party she definitely wasn't having fun at. Zephyra, Glarthox's voice grated against her ears like an automated customer service line. The Council has increased surveillance. They are not amused. No, really. I thought they'd be sending us thank you notes and a fruit basket, Zephyra muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a flurry of desperation and caffeine shakes. Glarthox, predictably, did not catch the sarcasm. Fruit baskets seem unnecessary given the current state of affairs. Thank you, Glarthox. Your insight is always a revelation, she replied. The alien's lack of humor was almost impressive in its consistency. The increased scrutiny from the Council was a wrench in the gears, and those gears were already rusty and prone to falling off. The rebellion's first attempt at undermining the ban had backfired like a poorly timed joke. And the punchline: more patrols, more restrictions, and a whole lot of paranoia. Zephyra had gathered the ragtag group in a secluded alcove of the archive, a spot so dusty even the janitorial drones were afraid to venture there. Gruck sat to one side, the dim lighting accentuating his brutish silhouette. Flurg waved his tentacles in a gesture that seemed to say both I'm calm and I might strangle someone. Trixel's wings were folded tightly against its back, a clear sign of tension. It hovered slightly above the ground, clearly uncomfortable being so close to the dust. All right, Zephyra started, trying to sound more confident than she felt. We've got a problem. A big one, just one. Trixel interjected, its voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm you could bottle and sell. All right, several. But the big one is that we're being watched, more closely than ever. We need to rethink our approach. Gruck grunted, a sound that could have meant agreement or indigestion. So what's the plan, fearless leader? Zephyra sighed. We need to be smarter, subtle, like a whisper, not a scream. Flurg tapped a tentacle against the floor in mock contemplation. Subtlety, huh? That's a new one for us. Zephyra ignored the jab. We've been too obvious. We need to create the illusion that we're complying while we find a new way to strike. The Council expects us to be loud and unruly. Can't imagine why, Trixel said, its wings fluttering with a sarcastic twinkle. Corblax gurgled something incoherent, its translation device sputtering out. What next? Move. We go underground, Zephyra replied, a plan forming in her mind like a storm cloud on the horizon. We make them think we've given up, while we gather intel and find their weak spots. Like rats in the walls, Gruck added with a grin, clearly enjoying the imagery a little too much. Exactly, Zephyra said. We become the thing they least expect, smart. The meeting wrapped up with a sense of wary optimism. It felt like trying to sail a leaky boat across a stormy sea, but at least they were pointed in the right direction, or at least any direction that wasn't straight onto the rocks. Days turned into a blur of silent rebellion and whispered conversations. The archive's atmosphere felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Every laugh was stifled, every sarcastic comment swallowed. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension. Flurg was the first to notice the new surveillance drones. They've got more eyes on us than a paranoid spider, he muttered, his tentacles curling around a holo tablet. Zephyra felt the pressure mounting like a bad hangover. The Council's enforcers were more visible than ever, buzzing through the archive's corridors like overzealous bees. If they weren't careful, their entire rebellion could be squashed like a bug underfoot. Stay cool, act normal, she instructed one day, though normal was hardly in their repertoire. We need to keep a low profile. If we get any lower, we'll be underground, Trixel quipped, its wings flicking dust from a nearby scroll. Underground? That's not a bad idea, Zephyra mused, a new plan forming like a particularly risky game of chess. The rebellion's next move was like pulling off a magic trick, distract, deceive, and hope no one notices the rabbit is missing. They worked quietly, dismantling their previous operations and scattering like dandelion seeds in the wind. Gruck took to spreading quiet dissent among the archive staff, planting seeds of doubt with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. You ever notice how we never get thanked for anything? He'd ask, his tone conspiratorial and innocent. Meanwhile, Trixel buzzed around the archive, dropping hints of rebellion like breadcrumbs. Did you hear? The council is afraid of its own shadow, it had whispered to passing archivists, feigning innocence with every tilt of its wings. The group's efforts were paying off. Slowly, they were becoming invisible, a part of the archive's background noise. The council's enforcers grew complacent, their vigilance waning as the rebels feigned obedience. It was a delicate balance, one misstep away from disaster. Zephyr felt the weight of it every day, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders, but she also felt a growing sense of determination. They were more than just a nuisance, they were a force. Then, just when things seemed to be settling into a deceptive calm, the council made their next move, a galaxy-wide announcement that echoed through the archive like a death knell. The Sarcasm ban was to be enforced with renewed vigor. Any violations would be met with swift and severe consequences. Zephyr's heart sank as she heard the message, the reality of their situation crashing over her like a tidal wave. They were in deeper than she'd realized, their rebellion a fragile house of cards in a hurricane. The group convened in their secret alcove once more, the air thick with tension and fear. Zephyr's mind raced, searching for answers in a sea of uncertainty. "We're out of time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to act now or risk losing everything." Gruck nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "What's the move, Zephyr?" She took a deep breath, her mind a whirlwind of plans and possibilities. "We go big. We turn their own weapons against them." Flurg raised a tentacle in confusion. "And how do we do that without getting vaporized?" Zephyr gave a crooked smile, her eyes glinting with renewed defiance. "We use their own rules, their own bureaucracy against them. We drown them in paperwork and red tape." The plan was audacious, bordering on the insane. But it was their best shot, a last, desperate gamble in a game stacked against them. As they set their plan into motion, Zephyr felt a strange calm settle over her. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about standing up, about refusing to bow down to a humorless regime. Whatever happened next, they wouldn't go quietly. They'd fight with every sarcastic bone in their bodies, every ounce of wit and defiance they could muster. Because in the end, laughter was more than just rebellion, it was resistance. And so, they embarked on their most daring operation yet, a campaign of confusion and chaos that would make even the most seasoned prankster proud. It was a plan filled with equal parts brilliance and madness, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be silenced. As the group set off on their separate missions, Zephyr watched them disappear into the shadows with a mixture of pride and trepidation. They were more than just rebels, they were a family, bound by a shared love of sarcasm and a deep-seated desire for freedom. Whatever the council threw at them next, they'd be ready to laugh in the face of danger, to defy a humorless universe with a smile and a well-timed quip. In the end, maybe that was the greatest rebellion of all. Zephyr found herself sitting in the kind of silence that felt like it had a personality, an annoying, judgmental kind of personality, like a distant relative who keeps reminding you of your failures at every family gathering. Around her, the deepest, dustiest archives loomed, each shelf packed with knowledge long forgotten by the galaxy. It was a history graveyard, and she was the lone mourner. "Looks like we've hit rock bottom," she muttered to herself, the words echoing in the empty space, and then decided to dig. The rebellion's most recent escapades had ended with a resounding thud, the kind that reverberates through your skull long after the impact. The council's new crackdown made the old one look like a friendly suggestion. It was past time for a change of scenery, or at least an adjustment in tactics. Yet instead of finding herself leading a charge, she was holed up in the archival equivalent of a crypt. She rifled through the ancient data tablets, most covered in a thick layer of disuse, like the galaxy's most neglected chocolate cake. There was no cake, of course, only words and images from a time when humans had dared to laugh in the face of adversity. Back when sarcasm was a sharp tool, not a dull blade blunted by bureaucratic nonsense. The others were scattered throughout the archive, licking their wounds and trying not to draw attention, a task akin to asking a sun to kindly stop being so bright. The council's enforcers were everywhere, their patrols as frequent as unwanted pop-up ads, each one more irritating than the last. Idle chatter was now a precious commodity, one traded in hushed tones and quick glances. Zephyr picked up a particularly ancient tablet, its title barely legible through the grime. "The Wit and Wisdom of Humanity, a compendium," she snorted. Wisdom. Right now, wisdom felt like an old friend who'd stopped picking up the phone. Glarthox shuffled awkwardly into her peripheral vision, his ungainly limbs at odds with the quiet space. "Zephyr, is this really the best use of our time?" he asked, his tone as flat as a deflated tire. "Got any better ideas? Maybe we should start a knitting circle instead." "I'm sure the council would love to see us cultivating such wholesome hobbies." Glarthox tilted his head, the alien equivalent of scratching one's head in confusion. "Knitting does not seem directly applicable to our current predicament, and this is why you're not in charge, Glarthox." She sighed and swiped the tablet, awakening text from its slumber. Words spilled onto the screen, recounting tales of old Earth comedians, jesters who wielded language like a scalpel, cutting into the absurdities of life with precision. Zephyr leaned back, letting the humor wash over her, the words a lifeline tossed into her sea of frustration. Here was proof that defiance could be both a weapon and a shield, one sharpened by wit and tempered with laughter. Glarthox, meanwhile, seemed to be engaging in an intricate dance with the concept of patience. "Zephyr, the council's edicts are not going to loosen because you're reading history." She waved a dismissive hand. "There's more than one way to fight a battle, Glarthox. Sometimes, you've got to look back before you can move forward." Is this another human metaphor? Yup. It's like the glue holding our civilization together. If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. Glarthox merely blinked, his lack of understanding a comforting constant in an unpredictable universe. Zephyr turned her attention back to the tablet, flipping through jokes and skits that had once made audiences laugh until they cried. Comedy, she mused, was a universal language, even if it was currently illegal. She wondered if the council ever laughed. Probably not, unless she counted their cruel amusement at humanity's expense. But that was a different kind of laughter, one that felt more like being punched in the face than a tickle to the ribs. The other members of the rebellion drifted in and out of the shadows, each busy with their own tasks. Trixel, for instance, had taken to rearranging the library's ancient maps, a task that seemed both pointless and meditative. "How's it going, Trix?" Zephyr asked, craning her neck to see around a particularly towering stack of dusty tomes. "If I rearrange these maps long enough, maybe I can chart a course to a universe where things aren't this screwed," Trixel replied, its wings fluttering in a parody of cheerfulness. "Or just make the janitorial drones really angry." "Either is fine." Zephyr gave a hollow laugh, one that felt more like a cough than anything else. "I'll take the second option. Angry drones might actually achieve something." Flurg had stationed himself near the main entrance, his tentacles a jittery mess of nervous energy. He glanced over at Zephyr, his eyes conveying a mixture of hope and despair. "Any grand revelations, boss?" Zephyr shook her head. "Just a reminder that humans used to be good at laughing." "Ah, the good old days," Flurg said. Before the sarcasm hit the fan, Gruck lumbered over, his presence like a living bulldozer. "We'll get through this," he said, voice low and steady. "We have to. That's what they all say just before the executioner's axe falls," Trixel added, ever the optimist. The somber mood hung in the air like the last smoggy cloud in a clear sky. Zephyr felt it pressing down on her, threatening to crush what little spirit remained. But there was also a spark, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Defiance, perhaps, or maybe madness. Yet in this moment, madness seemed like the only sane option. Zephyr focused back on the tablet, letting ancient jokes and jabs draw new battle lines in her mind. It was as if she could hear the voices of long-gone comedians whispering through the pages, encouraging her with their irreverence. The council had outlawed humor, but it couldn't erase the past. It couldn't silence the echoes of defiance. "We need to find a way to revive this," Zephyr declared, straightening her posture like a soldier planning a last stand. "How?" Flurg asked, tentacles twisting in anticipation. "We take what they fear most, our humor, and we weaponize it. We turn sarcasm into subversion." The others exchanged uncertain glances. It was a plan born out of desperation, sketchy at best, but the only path left untrodden. "Look," Zephyr continued, "the Council's power is based on control. They want a galaxy that's predictable, orderly. Humor disrupts that. It's chaos in a neat little package. If we can unleash it, even in small doses, we can start to unravel their grip." Glarthok still looked skeptical, though that was likely his default expression when faced with anything remotely creative. "And you believe this will be enough? Probably not. But it's a start." Gruck nodded, the movement as solid as a mountain shifting. "I'm with you, Zephyr." "We've got nothing left to lose, anyway." Trixel fluttered over, the sarcasm in its wings replaced by something softer. "For the record, I've always thought laughter was the best form of rebellion." Flurg twirled a tentacle as if considering. "Count me in. At least if this fails, we'll go down with style." Zephyr felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest, like finding a small campfire in the middle of a frozen wasteland. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and overmatched, but that didn't mean they were out of the fight. She flipped through the tablet one last time, committing to memory the words of those who had come before. The jokes, the jabs, the irreverent pokes at authority, they were more than just words. They were resistance woven into the very fabric of their existence. All that remained was to bring it to life, to breathe fresh air into the embers of an old flame. It wouldn't be easy, and it probably wouldn't be pretty, but it was a chance. The only one they had left. With renewed determination, Zephyr set the tablet down and turned to her companions. "All right, let's get to work." The group dispersed, their spirits buoyed by the promise of rebellion rekindled. Zephyr watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of dread and hope. It was dangerous, this path they were on. But then, the most dangerous paths often led to the greatest rewards. As the last of her crew disappeared into the depths of the archive, Zephyr allowed herself a small, defiant smile. They'd start by sowing seeds of humor, little by little, until the whole galaxy was laughing again. It was a long shot, a gamble against the odds, but it was theirs. In a universe where even sarcasm had become a forbidden fruit, they'd find a way to make laughter echo through the stars once more. And maybe, just maybe, they'd light the one fire no regime could ever extinguish. Zephyr scanned her ragtag group as they scattered through the dimly lit alcove of the Galactic Archive, affectionately known as the cosmic equivalent of a hoarder's attic. Each member of her motley crew was busy preparing for what she could only hope wouldn't be their mass funeral. Nothing quite like a little impending doom to spice up a Tuesday. Glarthox, meanwhile, hovered awkwardly in the corner, still wearing an expression that suggested he'd stumbled into a calculus exam when he'd only been looking for the bathroom. "So, what's the plan exactly?" he asked, which for him was tantamount to a motivational battle cry. "Simple," Zephyr replied, tapping a dusty data tablet like she was trying to wake a sleeping dragon. "We weaponize wit." Glarthox blinked, slowly translating the concept from human sarcasm to alien literalism. "You mean we're going to make jokes?" "Exactly. If the Council's so scared of humor, then it's time to give them what they've been missing. Think of it as a cosmic pie in the face." Trixel, who had taken a break from rearranging maps into nonsensical order, flitted over. "So we crack a few jokes and suddenly the Council's grip on the galaxy crumbles. Sounds almost too easy." Zephyr let out a short bark of a laugh. "If it were easy, I'd have done it already. But no, we need to be smart about it. We're talking a rolling tide of subversion." Flurg, his tentacles a whirling mess of nervous energy, chimed in. "And how exactly do we spread this tide?" I'm not sure our audience is exactly primed for a stand-up routine. But that's the beauty of it, Zephyr said, eyes alight with mischief. We use the archive's holo-projectors. We beam these jokes straight into the heart of every bureaucratic meeting, every propaganda broadcast, every council-sanctioned event. Our humor becomes the virus. Gruck, always the voice of practicality, rumbled, and how do you plan to get access to those systems? The place is guarded tighter than a miser's coin purse. Zephyr shrugged, a grin teasing at her lips. That's where our resident hacker comes in. She turned to an unassuming pile of data tablets, beneath which was buried their ace in the hole, Ronger, the most unlikely tech wizard in the galaxy. If a potato could develop sentience and a knack for coding, it'd probably look a lot like Ronger. Ronger peeked out, eyes glinting with the kind of mischief that only comes from knowing you're about to make a lot of powerful enemies very unhappy. You get me close enough to one of their terminals, and I'll have us in faster than you can say Council's a bunch of humorless bastards. Zephyr clapped her hands together, feeling the rush of momentum. Perfect. Everyone get your scripts ready. Trixel, you're in charge of gathering the funniest quips from the archives. Flurg, I want you to take charge of distribution logistics. Gruck, you and Glarthox are our muscle. We'll need you to make sure no one interrupts Ronger's little tech show. There was a murmur of agreement, tinged with the nervous energy of a crew about to try something stupidly ambitious and potentially deadly. Zephyr knew the odds were long, but it was either laugh or lie down and let the council slowly squeeze the life out of them. And she wasn't much for lying down. The group dispersed to their tasks, each member moving with a renewed sense of purpose. It felt good to have a plan, even if it was the kind that involved poking a hornet's nest with a stick and hoping you could outrun the swarm. Trixel, ever the winged cynic, hovered by Zephyr's side. So, what do we do if this all goes predictably pear-shaped? Zephyr smirked, her gaze fixed on the endless rows of dusty tablets. Then we laugh, one last time, and join the universe's longest list of martyrs who made all the wrong choices. Comforting, Trixel replied dryly, but there was a gleam of appreciation in its eyes. I always did like going out with a bang. Let's ensure it's a bang they hear in every corner of the galaxy, Zephyr replied, determination weaving itself into every word. Time to remind the universe that humans are at their best when they've got nothing left to lose. The Ior slipped by in a flurry of preparation. Scripts were drafted and redrafted, jokes tested on each other with the brutal honesty of those who knew that failure wasn't an option. Zephyr felt the thrill of rebellion sing in her veins, an intoxicating mix of adrenaline and audacity. Ronger, with Glarthox hovering like an overprotective parent, set about hacking into the Council's communication networks. His fingers danced over the ancient tablet, tapping into lines of code with the abandon of a pianist on speed. This better work, Gruck muttered, keeping watch at the entrance with the grim anticipation of someone expecting company, and not the friendly kind. Otherwise, we're just lining up for a front row seat to our own execution. You worry too much, Flurg chimed in, though his tentacles betrayed his own anxiety, twitching like they were doing an intricate jig. We'll make it work. We have to. Otherwise, it's back to a life of quiet desperation under the Council's thumb. Quiet desperation is highly underrated, Glarthox noted, his tone managing to sound both somber and wistfully optimistic. Zephyr, overseeing the preparations with an air of frenetic energy, shot Glarthox a grin. Don't worry. Desperation tends to get really loud really fast once you introduce humor into the mix. With Ronger's hacking skills paving the way, Trixel started uploading a selection of humor that would ideally make even the most humorless bureaucrat crack a smile, or at least double take. It was a mix of old Earth stand-up routines, biting sarcasm, and a few choice quips about the Council that were risky even by their standards. Uploading complete, Trixel announced, wings fluttering with anticipation. I'd say we've got ourselves quite the comedy special. Ronger gave a thumbs up, his eyes gleaming with a mischief that bordered on madness. And now we wait for the fireworks. Zephyr gathered her team, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders with the heaviness of a starship's hull. Remember, this is the start of something new. We're not just fighting back. We're taking back our right to laugh, to be human. The others nodded, their expressions a mix of defiance and hope. It was a fragile flame, this hope, but it was burning brighter than anything they'd felt in a long time. And if the council doesn't like it? Glarthox asked, though the question was mostly rhetorical. Then they can go stick their humor ban up their collective asses, Zephyr replied, not missing a beat. We've got a galaxy to remind. With the plan in motion, the group settled into a tense watch, each one acutely aware that they were teetering on the edge of a knife. Either their humor would light a fire of rebellion across the stars, or it'd fizzle out like a damp sparkler. Either way, it'd be one hell of a show. The first sign that their plan was working came not with a bang, but a whimper, a soft snicker that echoed through the archive's corridors. Then another, growing louder, rolling like distant thunder as the ripple effect of humor took hold. Word spread rapidly, each laugh a beacon, drawing more and more to the cause. The council enforcers, usually so smug in their power, found themselves the butt of jokes, their authority undermined by the very thing they'd tried to outlaw. Zephyr watched it unfold through the ancient holoprojectors, the humor spreading like wildfire. The council might have controlled the universe's narrative for decades, but now their carefully constructed facade was cracking, jokes wedging themselves into the crevices like persistent weeds. It wasn't long before the humor had spread beyond the archive, seeping into the very heart of the council's empire. Enforcers found themselves unable to maintain order, their edicts mocked openly, their speeches interrupted by laughter that refused to be silenced. Zephyr felt a shiver of triumph run through her. It was working. The rebellion was gaining traction, not with bloodshed, but with the power of human creativity. They had turned the council's own fear against them, used humor as the entry point to erode their control. "There's hope, isn't there?" Flurg asked, his tentacles still now, a calmness settling over him. "More than hope," Zephyr replied, her voice laced with satisfaction. "We've shown them that they can't simply erase us, that there are things even they can't control." Glarthox, ever the realist, added, "But what do we do once they come for us?" Zephyr met his gaze, a smile playing on her lips. "We keep laughing. It's the one thing they can't take away from us." The group laughed together, a sound filled with the weight of defiance. They knew they'd started something bigger than themselves, something that couldn't be easily extinguished. As the galaxy crackled with laughter, Zephyr allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. They had taken a stand, and in doing so, they'd lit a fire that burned brighter than any council decree. The fight was far from over, but they had something the council would never understand, an irrepressible, insatiable spirit. She looked at her friends, her allies, and felt a swell of pride. In a universe that wanted them silent, they'd found their voice, and it was a voice that echoed with wit and irreverence. With their plan in motion, the group knew the hardest part was yet to come. But for now, they had laughter on their side, and that was a weapon no council could ever hope to defeat. "Let's give them a show they'll never forget," Zephyr said, her grin as wide as the void. And with that, they set out to reclaim the stars. The universe wasn't known for its sense of humor, but then, neither was the Council of Order. Zephyr Rin, however, had a plan to change that, and not in a way that had earned them a pat on the back from the bureaucrats. More likely a swift kick in the ass. But hell, if they wanted an example of human tenacity, she was about to give them a damn good one. They gathered in the secluded alcove of the archive, a place filled with the kind of dust that had probably evolved into its own life form by now. Flurg had his tentacles full, twitching like they were sending Morse code to the floor. It was this very room where the rebellion had its first whispers, and where those whispers were about to become a cacophony of sarcasm and irreverence. "You've uploaded the routines?" Zephyr asked, glancing at Trixel, who was still riding the high of their humorous payload delivery. "Yep," Trixel said with a grin that could only be described as mischievous. "The council's gonna have their hands full trying to scrub that data." "Good, because I've got a few choice words I'd like to share with those humorless bastards," Zephyr replied, her smile sharp enough to cut through the tension. Everyone ready for the big show, Glarthox was still wrapping his head around human sarcasm, but he'd picked up a few things. "So this is where we distract them with laughter and hit them over the head with the truth. You catch on quick," Grux snorted, his practicality momentarily overshadowed by the impending chaos. "And when the council inevitably sends their enforcers?" Ronger asked, his fingers still dancing over the data tablet, now more a weapon than a relic. Zephyr shrugged, as if shrugging off the very concept of consequences. "We crack a few jokes, maybe a skull or two. If we're lucky, both'll stick. It was a plan so stupid it might actually work." The holoprojectors, those ancient technological relics, stood ready to beam their comedic insurgency across the stars. Flurg, usually a bundle of nerves, was surprisingly calm. Maybe he'd finally come to terms with the fact that they were all just a cosmic joke in a universe that took itself too seriously. As the gloomy corridors of the archive echoed with their preparations, Zephyr couldn't help but be reminded of the old Earth saying, "May you live in interesting times." How quaint, she thought, that they were about to redefine interesting. Council enforcers were already on heightened alert, their patrols as frequent as an overeager gym rat's selfie uploads. But this time, it wasn't their physical presence that concerned Zephyr. It was their omnipresent surveillance. They were everywhere like mold but less useful. "We're as ready as we'll ever be," Zephyr said, looking at each member of her motley crew. "Let's go remind them why they fear what they can't understand." As their laughter and jokes spread through the holo networks, the reaction was immediate. The Council, in their infinite wisdom, had never considered humor a threat, until it was too late. The jokes cut through their propaganda like a hot knife through styrofoam, revealing the absurdity of their rule. The archives echoed with laughter, a sound that was almost alien in its rarity. Even the most cynical of aliens couldn't help but double-take as the humor infiltrated their systems. The Council had underestimated the power of a well-timed punchline, and now it was biting them right in their collective posterior. Then came the inevitable response, an emergency broadcast from the Council, a desperate attempt to regain control. The enforcers were called to arms, their stoic faces trying to mask the growing panic. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't even understand it. Humor was their kryptonite, and someone had just thrown it into the heart of their empire. Zephyr and her crew watched in amusement as the Council floundered, their authority undermined by something as simple as a joke. "Well, that's one way to get a laugh," Trixel quipped, his wings fluttering with excitement. Gruck, ever the realist, crossed his arms. "It's only a matter of time before they show up here. We'd better be ready." "Let them come," Zephyr said, her voice carrying a mix of defiance and glee. "We've got the one thing they can't fight, humor." Glarthox asked, still not entirely sure how sarcasm qualified as a weapon. "More like a refusal to take their crap," Zephyr replied, her determination unyielding. "And that's something they'll never understand." As the Council frantically tried to regain control, the rebellion spread beyond the archive. Word of the uprising traveled faster than a rumor at a family reunion, fueled by the laughter of those who had been silent too long. The numerous alien civilizations, usually as humorless as a rock, found themselves giggling at the absurdity of it all. "Do you think it'll stick?" Flurg asked, his voice tinged with hope. "It already has," Zephyr said, her confidence infectious. "We've given them something they can't erase. We've made them look ridiculous." The Council's emergency meeting was broadcasted across the galaxy. Their attempts to placate the masses met with jeers and, you guessed it, more laughter. The humor infection spread, and for the first time, they were the punchline. Zephyr's team watched the spectacle unfold, the holoprojectors displaying a scene more farcical than a clown convention on acid. The council had been exposed, their iron-fisted rule reduced to the comedic equivalent of a banana peel slip. And then the unthinkable happened. A member of the council, someone who had probably been born without a funny bone, cracked a smile. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. The facade began to crumble, one chuckle at a time. Gruck raised an eyebrow, his voice laced with disbelief. "Did that just happen?" "Damn right it did," Zephyr replied, her grin widening. "We've shown them that diversity isn't something to fear. It's something to celebrate." The council's sarcasm ban was lifted, not with an official decree, but with the acceptance that laughter was a part of life they could no longer ignore. The aliens began to understand that, like a good joke, cultural diversity was essential to any thriving society. Zephyr felt a wave of relief wash over her. They'd done it. They had reclaimed their voice, shown the universe that there was more to humanity than the council's narrow understanding. "We did it," Flurg said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. Zephyr nodded, looking around at her crew. "We did. And we did it our way." Glarthox, always the one to state the obvious, said, "So, what now?" "Now we keep laughing," Zephyr replied, her tone light. "Because if we've learned anything, it's that a good laugh is as vital as air." They watched as the galaxy adapted to this new normal, laughter echoing through the cosmos like a newly discovered element. The council, their power diminished, had no choice but to accept it. The archives, once a place of silence and dust, now hummed with life. Zephyr and her crew had sparked something bigger than any one of them. They had shown that in the face of tyranny, laughter might just be the greatest weapon of all. As they basked in the glow of their success, Zephyr couldn't help but chuckle. The universe might be a dark and unforgiving place, but as long as there were people willing to laugh in the face of despair, there was hope. "Time to give him more to laugh about," Zephyr said, her eyes sparkling with defiance. "Let's go see what other trouble we can stir up." And so, with laughter as their guide, they set off into the stars, ready to remind the universe how wonderfully unpredictable humans could be. The Galactic Archive was still settling into its newfound groove, like an ancient starship hitting warp speed after a millennia-long nap. Dust motes danced in the beams of light streaming through ruptures in the ceiling, as if celebrating their release from the clutches of boredom. Sure, the place still reeked of historical neglect, but now it smelled faintly of freedom, too. No more tiptoeing around sarcasm like it was nuclear waste. Zephyr Rin leaned back in her chair, or what passed for a chair in the archive's less-than-stellar furniture department. Her feet were propped up on a makeshift table made from ancient holoprojectors no one had dared to touch for fear of being electrocuted, or worse, sucked into a bad sitcom rerun. "So what's next?" Flurg asked, his tentacles busy rearranging a pile of data tablets that had seen better centuries. "We've turned the galaxy's sense of humor back on. Where do we go from here?" Zephyr smirked. "Well, we've already tickled the universe pink. Maybe we can teach him to take a joke next. Or at least not to scream bloody murder every time they hear one." Wronger, standing by with his ever-present data tablet, chuckled darkly. "I imagine the council's current meeting agenda involves a lot of crying and pointing fingers." "Yeah," Zephyr said, "they are probably blaming each other for not predicting humanity would weaponize humor. It's not like they had centuries of warnings or anything. Predictable as a rerun of Galaxy's most boring bureaucrats," Gruck chimed in, casting a cynical eye over the chaotic scene unfolding in the archive. "I'll bet every council member's scrambling to save face." Quarblax, still gelatinous as ever, burbled in agreement through the translation device. "I don't think they ever expected a punchline to be their undoing." Zephyr laughed, the sound cutting through the dust-laden air like a beam of sunlight through storm clouds. "They underestimated us." "The irony is almost beautiful," almost, Glarthox said, finally getting the hang of sarcasm. "Like an artistic depiction of chaos in an art gallery nobody visits." Speaking of artistic chaos, Trixel interjected with a grin, I heard the council's emergency broadcast was interrupted by a clip of two counselors debating whether their uniforms were more beige or taupe. They're not quite ready for a color wheel, are they? Flurg asked, his tone dry as the archive's dusty air. Let's face it, their sense of style is about as vibrant as a black hole, Zephyr said with a shrug. We've given them something to think about, though. Maybe they'll even start wearing something other than monochrome. Yeah, Ronger said, smirking like Brown. The archive itself was undergoing a transformation of sorts. Where once it had been a mausoleum of forgotten histories, it was now a vibrant hub of activity. Alien species filed through its corridors, exchanging jokes like a currency long overdue for revaluation. Even the most stoic archivists were trying out this strange new thing called humor. It was a revolution of the mind, and the only casualties were boredom and oppression. Zephyr watched it all with satisfaction. The rebellion had done more than just annoy the council into submission. It had sparked a cultural renaissance. And she'd been at the forefront, cracking jokes and taking names. It was a heady feeling like winning a galactic lottery without ever buying a ticket. Careful, Zephyr, Gruck said, watching her expression. Don't get too high on your own jokes. You'll float away. Wouldn't want that, she replied, still smiling. I'd missed the punchlines. The Council of Order, meanwhile, was backpedaling faster than a politician caught in a scandal. Their attempts to reclaim authority were met with laughter and disdain, their serious faces only adding fuel to the comedic fire. Ironically, their biggest weakness was their inability to laugh at themselves. That's the beauty of it, though, Zephyr said. For all their rules and regulations, the one thing they can't legislate is how people feel about them. And right now, everyone feels like they are the butt of the joke, Glarthox said, finally nailing human humor. Exactly, Zephyr replied. We didn't just change the punchline, we changed the story. The archival halls echoed with the sounds of transformation, a symphony of voices no longer stifled by the weight of oppression. It wasn't perfect because nothing ever was, but it was something. And sometimes something was enough. Feels good, doesn't it? Zephyr asked, glancing around at her crew. Yeah, Trixel said, wings fluttering with satisfaction. It's like a weight's been lifted, or like a bad joke finally hitting its mark, Flurg added, his tentacles now relaxed. Don't get too comfortable, though, Gruck warned. There's still plenty of work to be done. Zephyr nodded, her expression serious now. Oh, I know, but at least now we've got the galaxy's attention. And maybe, just maybe, we can teach them to use their words for more than just following orders. Ronger grinned, a rare sight. For a bunch of rebels, we didn't just break the mold. We melted it down and recast it as a rubber chicken. The laughter that followed was genuine, a sound that had become the anthem of their rebellion. It was a testament to their resilience, their refusal to back down in the face of absurdity. Zephyr felt a twinge of pride at what they'd accomplished. They'd taken on a seemingly invincible bureaucracy and toppled it with nothing more than laughter and a hefty dose of sarcasm. It was a victory for the ages, and one that would be remembered long after the dust of the archive had settled. Think we'll be remembered for this? Glarthox asked, his tone oddly thoughtful. Probably, Zephyr replied. But not for the reasons we set out for. More like those crazy humans who made the galaxy laugh at itself. I can live with that, Flurg said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Me too, Zephyr agreed. Because if we've learned anything, it's that the universe is a lot more bearable when you're laughing. The archive, now a place of laughter and life, echoed with their triumph. It was a new era, one where humor was not just tolerated but celebrated. The galaxy was adapting, and so were its inhabitants. Even the council, though still trying to save face, couldn't completely ignore the shift. They were slowly realizing that control was a delicate thing, and that sometimes a light touch was more effective than a heavy hand. As the day wore on, Zephyr and her crew watched the universe change around them. It was slow, like watching grass grow on a barren planet, but it was happening. The laughter and humor they'd unleashed were spreading like a virus, one that couldn't be contained or controlled. Zephyr leaned back, letting the sounds of the archive wash over her. It was a symphony of change, a testament to their efforts, and it was only the beginning. "Time to stir things up again," Trixel asked, his grin infectious. "Always," Zephyr replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "We've got a universe to entertain." With that, they set out once more, ready to spread their laughter across the stars. Because in a universe that often took itself too seriously, they discovered the true power of humor. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always something to smile about. And as they ventured into the cosmos, laughter trailing in their wake, Zephyr knew they'd found their true calling, not just rebels, but heralds of humor in a universe desperately in need of a good laugh. They were the punchline the galaxy never saw coming, and they were damn proud of it. As the archive continued to buzz with activity, Zephyr reflected on everything they'd achieved. They'd given the universe a gift, one that couldn't be quantified or measured but felt in every laugh and every smile. "Here's to a future full of bad jokes and even worse punchlines," Zephyr said, raising an imaginary glass. "Cheers to that," her crew replied in unison, their voices echoing in agreement. And with that, they continued on their journey, ready to remind the universe of the importance of laughter, one joke at a time. Because if there was one thing they knew, it was that humor was here to stay, and so were they.